Well, first of all, thank you very much. I would like to thank the National Museums of World Culture and the UNESCO National Commission for inviting UNESCO today to this event. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to give you a presentation on UNESCO's program on the fight against illicit trafficking in cultural property. Here you have an overview of the so-called UNESCO Culture Conventions. You may be aware of the 1972 UNESCO Convention on World Heritage, the 2001 Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage. So then we also have the 2005 Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, the 54 Convention on the Protection of Cultural Heritage in the event of armed conflict and its two protocols, and the 1970 Convention on the fight against illicit trafficking in cultural property, and its complement, the 1995 UNIDROIT Convention, which is a complement of the 1970 Convention from international private law. Here you have a map of the current state of ratifications of the 1970 Convention. As you can see, as of today, we have 132 states parties. Very recently, Ghana and Benin have ratified. As you can see, there are some regions with quite a low ratification rate: East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. Sweden ratified in 2003, and all Nordic countries have done so. The 1970 Convention has three main pillars: preventive measures, restitution provisions, and international cooperation. It's important to know that this convention, it's not retroactive, and it's not self-executing. It means that the countries, once they ratify, they need to transpose the 1970 Convention into national law. Concerning preventive measures, when a state ratifies, it needs to develop a series of preventive measures, such as, for instance, the creation of specialized units in the police, in customs. I have learned today that Sweden has already a specialized unit in the police, which is very, very good news. We have other examples in Europe, for instance, in France, we have the OCVC, in Spain, we have the Guardia Civil, in Italy, we have the Carabinieri, too. Other preventive measures are the issuing of expert certificates, the development of laws for the protection of cultural property, the issue of educational campaigns. Sweden has recently launched many different awareness-raising campaigns. And most importantly, the inventories of cultural property. Also, the state needs to develop rules for collectors and dealers and increase penal and administrative sanctions. I was saying that it's very important to develop inventories for cultural property. Why is that? It's because the 1970 Convention only applies to those objects which are part of the inventory of a public institution. This is why it's so important to develop consistent inventories. The requesting state needs to provide all evidence for the restitution of the object. And a just compensation is to be paid to an innocent purchaser. The problem is that in the 1970 Convention, there are no details on what an innocent purchaser means. Regarding international cooperation, when the cultural heritage of a country is especially at risk, states parties of the Convention can take part in a concerted effort to safeguard this cultural heritage. We have now examples in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Libya, or in Mali, for instance. Through, for instance, measures such as the import and export controls. Here you have an overview of UNESCO's main partners on the fight against illicit trafficking. Interpol, you may be aware of the Interpol database on stolen cultural objects. The World Customs Organization, UNODC, which has recently also issued some guidelines on crime prevention for illicit trafficking of cultural property. The International Council of Museums, which has developed many tools for protecting heritage, such as Code of Dealers for Museums. And UNIDROIT, that I'm going to present right now. The 1995 UNIDROIT Convention, as I said before, it's the complement of the 1970 Convention from international private law. It's been ratified by only 38 state parties, so it has quite a low ratification rate. What is important to know about this convention is that it applies to all cultural objects, also those which are not part of an inventory, and all stolen or illicitly exported cultural objects are to be returned. This convention also provides a very detailed explanation of what due diligence means. For instance, someone who buys a cultural object needs to check that this object is not in the Interpol database on stolen objects, for instance. Now I would like to mention very briefly the 2199 United Nations Security Council resolution that you have already mentioned in your presentation. This resolution imposes a worldwide moratorium on trade of cultural objects from Syria and Iraq, for Syria from 2011 and Iraq from 1990. UNESCO is the coordinating agency of the implementation of this resolution at the international level. In 2015, UNESCO organized a meeting with all its partners, with Interpol, the World Customs Organization, UNIDROIT, ICOM, in order to come up with a roadmap for the partners to implement this resolution, and also to come up with a series of guidelines for states to implement this resolution at the national level. Here you have some of the guidelines that UNESCO and its partners developed for the implementation of the resolution at the national level. For instance, and most importantly, the revision of national legislation concerning import and export certificates, provenance check, due diligence, or strengthening penal sanctions. It's also very important to properly implement the existing legal instruments, such as the 1970 Convention and the 1995 UNIDROIT Convention. It's also very important to record the seized and Iraqi-Syrian artifacts, and to launch awareness-raising and capacity-building campaigns, such as Sweden has done several times already. This is the roadmap for the network of experts, as I told you, with UNODC, UNIDROIT, the World Customs Organization, ICOM. We are trying to come up with a series of actions to implement the resolution at the international level. We need to gather and analyze information on the looting of cultural objects, also establish a list of independent cultural experts so that also we can authenticate the objects which come across our networks, and identify priority areas for joint programs. Such, for instance, we are going to implement in the forthcoming months training for magistrates in our market countries so that they know how to actually implement and apply the international conventions and the United Nations Security Council resolution. We have received almost 50 reports from states on the implementation of this resolution. Most of the countries have revised legislation. They have contributed financially to UNESCO for the implementation of activities in the field, have organized awareness-raising and capacity-building campaigns, and have shared information on the seized Iraqi and Syrian cultural artifacts. However, this information is quite limited, and not all states share this kind of information with the network of partners. Now I would like to very briefly speak about the 2015 recommendation on museums. You may be aware of it. It was adopted by the General Conference of UNESCO in 2015. Apart from providing a definition of museums, this recommendation explains also the main functions of museums: preservation, the acquisition, collection management, risk analysis, emergency plans, and the maintenance of professional inventories, which are, as we have seen, essential for fighting against illicit trafficking. Museums also conduct research for the study of collections. They have a very important communication role, since they disseminate knowledge on collections, organize exhibitions, and take part in cultural activities. And also, very importantly, education. Museums play a very important role for conveying the message of the importance of cultural heritage in all its forms. UNESCO assists states in the implementation of the 1970 Convention, and we focus our action in technical advice and capacity building, especially in countries and regions which are in an emergency situation, such as the case of Syria or Iraq right now. Here you have a map with some of the capacity building trainings that we have implemented recently. Over the last 5 years, we have conducted almost 40 workshops for over 1,000 participants. When I speak about these participants, I'm referring to people working in museums, customs, police, museums, governmental bodies. And as I was saying before, we give special attention to countries in an emergency situation and also to regions with a low ratification rate. As you can see in Southeast Asia and Africa and Latin America, we have conducted many of these activities. This is an overview of the contents of this kind of trainings, but we obviously adapt them depending on the needs. We have a very strong legal component. We train about the 1970 and 1995 Unidad Convention. We analyze the existing legal frameworks and we provide advice for improving them. We also train on return and restitution procedures, bilateral cooperation, bilateral agreements, and then we have a very strong operational component too. We train experts on how to use expert certificates, object ID, which is a description of cultural artifacts which should be applied at the international level, databases of stolen cultural objects, the role of heritage police and the role of customs in illicit trafficking, traffic on the internet. I will come back to this issue later on because it's one of the most crucial ones. The protection of archaeological sites, and we also have an awareness-raising component. We try to develop adapted materials for different target audiences. We would be, of course, very happy to conduct a capacity building training for Nordic countries, or for Sweden, for police, for customs, depending on the needs. Here you have an example of a project financed by the European Commission on Syria. It was a project which started being implemented in 2014. It's been 3 years already. It not only focused on illicit trafficking of cultural property, but also on intangible heritage, on built heritage. So let's say that it has an overarching view of the problem. Here you have some data on the results. So far, can you hear me properly? So far, we have sent over 7 tons of museum material to Syria, thanks to international cooperation from French and Swiss institutions. We have trained almost 500 heritage professionals. We have launched 35 visibility activities, launched 2 awareness-raising clips. We have also sent missions on technical advice to Palmyra, for instance. And 120 institutions have taken part in these trainings and meetings. We also have an internet platform that you can access online. Here you have a summary of all the trainings and meetings that we have conducted. For instance, and as you can see here, in 2014 and in 2015, we trained police and customs in Syria and also in all neighboring countries, because it's very important to come up with regional networks. We have also trained museum professionals to avoid looting. We have also organized meetings on the creation and updating of databases on stolen cultural objects from Syria. And we have also organized meetings on how to improve inventories in Syria. Finally, here you have a map of Syria with a picture of all the police and customs officers trained, as well as heritage professionals. As you can see, we have trained police and customs in Iraq, in Jordan, in Turkey, of course in Syria. Regarding Iraq, UNESCO's action in Iraq started in the early 60s, but this is just a summary of what has been done recently. UNESCO came up with an action plan in 2014 And based on this action plan, we have developed several activities, such as capacity building in risk assessment and emergency contingency planning for museums. We have also launched awareness-raising campaigns in the framework of Unite for Heritage. And since 2003, we have been assisting the Iraqi National Museum for restoring of the laboratory and staff on illicit trafficking of cultural property. At the same time, we are also closely monitoring the market. So we're trying to see if there are objects with Iraqi origin online, but as you know, this is a monumental task. We have also sent several letters to markets to raise the awareness and asking them to be vigilant on the trade of Iraqi cultural objects. We have also launched several awareness-raising campaigns. We have also done tools for children in Iraq, such as applications. We have translated several magazines into Arabic and organized concerts in the framework of Unite for Heritage. Also, that's what I was mentioning right now. I guess that you're all aware of this campaign that was launched in 2014 by the UNESCO Director General. And it's a social media campaign which aims at celebrating and safeguarding cultural heritage worldwide and all its forms. It actually started as a social media campaign, but now it's becoming something much broader. And we are trying to link all kinds of awareness-raising and communication efforts of UNESCO to this campaign. For instance, we have developed TV spots for Iraqi local populations. We have also launched social media campaigns. We have also produced clips, very short clips, which are being shown in airports all over the world, so that tourists know that they cannot just go to a country and come back to their homes with whatever they want. We are also addressing the awareness of young people. We have developed special materials, such as this cultural heritage in a box for Mongolia, and we are really trying to advocate for the integration of the issue of illicit trafficking in school curricula, and also in formal and non-formal education materials. We are also developing partnerships with museums, such with the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, under the banner of Unite for Heritage. We're going to be distributing leaflets on the importance of fighting against illicit trafficking in all public museums in Berlin. We're also developing partnerships with travel guides, such as Lonely Planet, so that tourists, again, know that they cannot traffic with cultural property. We're also developing partnerships with airlines for the same purpose, and I would like to take this opportunity to encourage the UNESCO National Commission to give us, try to share networks that you may have, so that we can build up these kind of partnerships in Sweden. Finally, but most importantly, is the cooperation with the art market. As you know, if there were no collectors trying to come up with objects illicitly trafficked, there would be no illicit trafficking. So we're trying to raise the awareness of this segment of the population so that we can really cut illicit trafficking from its roots. We are in contact with major auction houses, Christie's, Sotheby's, but the problem is that there are many thousands of online platforms, and it's almost impossible to track it down. That's why UNESCO insists on the fact that state parties to the convention should also try to make an effort to monitor this at the national level, because it's very important to have this information so that we can act. Then once the information is transmitted to Interpol or to the national police forces, action can be taken. We actually organized a meeting in March 2015, a round table on the art market, where we had invitees from Sotheby's, Christie's, from regional associations of art dealers, from collectors, and we discussed many issues, especially due diligence, the importance of provenance check, and also the importance of reinforcing legislation at the national and international level. I would also like to take this opportunity to announce that thanks to the funding of the European Commission, we're going to implement in 2017 and 2018 a project for the art market in Europe. We're going to train the art market in Europe on issues relating to due diligence and provenance check. So you will learn more about this project very soon. And finally, I would also like to announce that we are going to launch a unit-twin network of universities called ProCult, with the aim of coming up with more research on the illicit trafficking of cultural property in the Middle East and North African region. So it's a new project. Right now, we only have 7 core implementing universities, so we always welcome universities from Sweden to take part of this initiative, which will be very helpful for enlarging our network of partners for the capacity building and awareness raising matters. So I invite you to propose universities or research centers which could be interested in this initiative. This is the end of my presentation. I will, of course, be very happy to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for your presentation of UNESCO's important work to combat illicit trafficking. So now I will open the floor for questions. And if you have a question, please raise your hand and present yourself before you ask your question. And a microphone will be passed around.
Thank you. My name is Andreas Kokours, and I'm the Cyprus ambassador here in Stockholm. Welcome, and thank you to UNESCO and to the museum for organising this timely event. Amongst the various conventions that you outlined there was the UNIDROIT of 1995, which we saw there were only 38 countries.
38, yes.
38 countries that have signed on to that. One effort that we're trying to do now is to see whether we can find synergies in the various international conventions to make them more effective. And I think UNIDROIT would be one of those conventions that has much more value added than others have realized. Could you comment on that? And also, very briefly, when you talk about due diligence and provenance, where should the responsibility lie? Because everybody passes the buck. Is it to the eventual purchaser? Is it to the auction houses? Whatever. Everybody passes the buck there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these comments. Indeed, UNESCO is advocating for the ratification of the UNIDROIT Convention because, as you can see, it's of utmost importance to ratify together with the 1970 in order to have a broader protection framework for cultural objects. The problem has been that many, especially many art market countries, it's not the case of Nordic countries because all of them have ratified except from Iceland, the UNIDROIT Convention, but many art market countries still think that it's going to be a problem, that it's going to be some kind of, that it's going to make it more difficult to trade in cultural objects in their national territory if they ratify this instrument, which actually is not true. And actually, the EU directive, which has been recently been adopted, it takes most of the articles of the UNIDROIT Convention to practice. So at the European level, practically, it's going to be applied. Problem is that many other countries have no intention of ratifying whatsoever. But I totally agree with you that it should be ratified at the global level if we want to have a sound protection of cultural property. Regarding due diligence, it should be, well, first of all, integrated into national legislation. And also, it mostly relies on the collector itself. That's why there is a huge problem of lack of awareness. And also the problem that collectors, many collectors are not even professional collectors anymore. Like 40, 50 years ago, collectors who would buy this kind of objects would have a special interest in the topic. It's not the case anymore. Even young people who have no particular interest in cultural objects are just buying them because they happen to see them on Facebook. So that's why we need to raise the awareness of all the general public, because the main responsibility lies on the collector. And the art market too, but in the art market, as we all know, there are other interested economic interests. So we're trying to raise the awareness of all the different segments of the population in this regard. Thank you.
We have time for more questions.
Okay, if you can hear me? Here, all right. Frida Larsdotter Lundgren, I'm with the Swedish Police Department of National Operations. You mentioned resolution 2199, and it's a fairly recent resolution, but have you done any kind of follow-up work or research regarding what sort of legislative action, for instance, in import in due diligence, the signing parties, the countries have done?
We know from the reports that many countries have actually reinforced the national legislation. So it's the case of Germany, for instance. I'm sure that Markus Hilgert will develop more on this. When it comes to actual action, we are now going to organize this training so that also people, especially in our market countries, they know how to apply the international conventions and also become aware of the Security Council resolution. But as I said before, many countries, they have only developed capacity building and awareness raising initiatives for Syrian and Iraqi cultural objects, but legislation needs to be further strengthened at the international level, and that's why we still need to do more advocacy. We're trying to come up with more initiatives at the international level with our network of partners. So it's going to be a mid-term, long-term strategy rather than something which can be done because, as you know, sometimes it takes years to change legislation, especially when it concerns cultural property. So I think that the results will be seen in a few years. And also the problem is that many countries are not sharing information on the objects which have been seized. Also because since it relates to terrorism, many countries are not really sharing this kind of information with UNESCO or with Interpol.
But regarding the changes in legislation, within a couple of years, I think it would be a rather good idea to gather up what the individual countries have done so that each country may draw from the experiences
Absolutely.
and adjustments of the others.
Well, in this regard, you may know that we have a periodic reporting on the 1970 Convention. The last reporting period was 2015, the next one will be in 2019. And we have actually we have inserted a question concerning Security Council resolution in this reporting form so that we can also gather all actions undertaken since the resolution. We'll have this information then by the end of 2019, early 2020. We'll have an online reporting tool, so it will be also easier for us to come up with the information. But you're absolutely right, it's very important for us to know what the changes have been so that we can also take action after.